Good morning. Okay, today is Wednesday, the 19th of September 2018. This is the nybbles.io daily programming stream. My name is Jeff. I write code every day and I stream here on Twitch Monday through Friday. And I continue to work on Basecode. Made some progress post stream yesterday, so I'll kind of review some of that and talk about what I'm probably going to do today. I have a slightly more compressed schedule this morning, so I think I'm going to lay the groundwork for what I have to do next, or at least think about it. Hey, Magnum Baguette. But before I do that, I heard that he was taking some time off. I didn't hear that he'd left. All right, while this is building, I think we got a clean build on this. I'll talk a little bit about what I did yesterday real quick. So I have issues for adding the width construct to the parser compiler, the for in statement, and defer. So I did a bunch of work there yesterday. One area that was broken was I had my with literal had the wrong token type, so I fixed that. And then I double checked, on the defer literal and the for literal, all that stuff is good on the token side. The lexer, I think I had to make a couple minor changes. On the parsing side, I already had a for in prefix parser. I adjusted it slightly to accommodate some of the changes I'd made since I originally wrote it. But it's pretty straightforward. We create the for in node, we collect any comments, we parse the declaration, the induction variable declaration for the for loop. And that goes on the left-hand side. We collect any more comments, we look for the in literal, then we parse the source expression, and we get any comments around that, and then the body of the for loop goes as a child on the for node. For parsing defer, again, I think I already had the shell here. I just needed to parse comments, and with, I think I had to add, and the left, so with is with a variable reference. So you can put comments on either side of the variable reference in a block. So this parses those parts out. Added make functions to the element builder for all that, and then inside of the AST evaluator wired up. So there's a with expression, pretty simple. We call make with. We resolve the identifier reference for the with, and then we evaluate the block. And that all gets bundled up into the with element. Defer is structurally pretty simple. It's just whatever expression is after defer. But it's deceptively simple here. It gets more complex. For in is pretty complex. If we ignore the induction variable in the block for a second, the right-hand side of that for in statement is it needs to evaluate to an array. Right now, we don't have arrays, really. We sort of do, but there's nothing in them, and we're missing other parts to make that work. Now, I had thought about implementing similar to like the way Python does it, having a range function. I originally thought I would make that an intrinsic. I could do that. And if this evaluates to that intrinsic call, then we have some kind of wrapper for it, or we just leave it as an intrinsic, and then at emit time, we'd kind of handle that as a special case. Alternatively, though, I thought, well, if I fix some of these other things, then I could actually just write functions, start writing library functions in Basecode itself that would do these things. So I think that's probably what I would like to do at this point. Instead of adding more shit to the C++ compiler and making it more complicated. The body of the for loop is fairly straightforward, but it is a scope. And this will bring me to another issue here in a moment. The induction variable is, so just like any other variable declaration, it could have a type, it may not have a type. So first off, if it isn't a symbol, that's bad. And if it is, then we need to, and it has a type identifier on it, then we need to evaluate that type identifier and get a type reference for it. But if it doesn't have a type specified, then we need to infer whatever that right-hand side's type is. So again, we're going to have an array, and if it's an array of any, then the type of the induction variable would be in. If it's an array of U8s or U32s, then the induction variable would be U32. So, but needless to say, right, like we're missing plumbing on the array side and lots of other stuff, and so that's not going to work 100% yet. And then and this is where some of the scope stuff starts to come into play. We get back into stack frames and things. The induction variable belongs to the body, that scope. It's not declared in the outer scope, it's declared in the inner scope of the for itself. I mean, technically, I think this will work the way it is now, but at least in terms of putting the identifier, the declaration in the right place. The problem is, again, when we get on the code gen side, I need to address stack frame stuff. So this is like, it's there, the maker stuff is in place, and some of the plumbing's in place for these things. Defer, likewise, is kind of an interesting beast. Defer is, trying to think of a good way to describe it. Defer is going to have to somehow also tie in with the proper stack frames, because we're going to need to either have like we need to somehow, within the scope that defer applies to, we need to make sure that they get generated in the correct order. But it's not even just that, right? It's built into the way the stack frames unwind. So yeah, there's relationships there. So the elements are going to be created, but they're not going to emit in the correct order right now. And really, to address all that, we need to get into the stack frame stuff. So, so for number 80, number 32, number 31, I've implemented pretty much as I can right now until I can address some of these other things. Once we get those other things working, then fixing these up should be fairly straightforward. So yeah, these are just changes to some of the stuff I did yesterday. Just kind of finish off the plumbing for these. Pretty straightforward stuff. I'm going to commit that, and then we'll actually get into what I think has to come next. All right. Those are on hold until I can, finish this other stuff. And yeah, so these are, what's next? Am I addicted to coffee? I don't know. It depends on what you mean by addicted. No, because there are days I actually don't drink coffee. But I would say that on previous experience, if I wanted to cold turkey off of coffee, it would be unpleasant. Lots of gastro issues for a short while, and probably some headaches. That doesn't really have anything to do with coffee. It's just caffeine in general. Right? So whether I was drinking coffee or caffeinated tea or soda or whatever, if it had caffeine, I'd have. So really, the question you're asking is, am I addicted to caffeine? And I would say that most of the Western world is addicted to caffeine on some level. But again, addicted is it's a tricky word because to me, in my mind, saying that I'm addicted to caffeine is not the same as saying that I'm addicted to heroin, right? It's not, they're not equivalent, except we use the same word. And I don't think it's very accurate. I think because, again, your question implies an impairment, right? Where addicted implies a diminution of functioning in life because you are addicted. And I don't think that's really, again, English doesn't have different words for this, so it's not really, it's just a language issue. But what you're really asking is my addiction to caffeine such that it is ruining my life? And the answer is no. So you would have to have worded your question much more succinctly, or much more specifically, to get the answer I think you wanted. Because I've quit, consuming caffeine before. It's unpleasant, but the unpleasantness is not, it is not the equivalent of the DTs or withdrawal symptoms from extremely hard drugs, right? It's not in the same category. I don't have to go on an ibogaine trip to not consume caffeine. At worst, I have to take some Imodium and some Advil or Tylenol or something for perhaps a week, right? I'm going to ask myself frequently why it is I don't want coffee. Why, what's so bad about caffeine? Why am I trying to kick it? But I could do it, right? But I have the suspicion that if I, again, just to use heroin as an example, if I were hooked on heroin, that process would not be anywhere near the same, right? So, technically, am I addicted to caffeine? Yes. But what is the relative harm of that addiction? And I would argue that you could take any habit, right? And that's the other thing too. Drinking coffee, the English drinking tea at tea time, these are habits. So in our modern scientific way of looking at the world, we can also call it an addiction because we understand the chemical nature of some of the things that we're consuming in those habits. And we understand that, again, regardless of the liquid that is carrying the caffeine, we understand that it's the caffeine in said liquids that is the addicting agent, okay? But the habit is independent of the addiction, right? My parents, my entire period growing up and up until my mom passed away, they drank coffee every day in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's a ritual, that's a habit, that's a cultural thing. Did they do it because they were addicted to caffeine? I would say no, because the ritual started before the addiction, right? The addiction reinforces the habit or encourages it because you would be aware of the fact that you might get an upset stomach or you might get a headache later because you didn't have caffeine. But there obviously are days where they didn't have coffee exactly at 3 in the afternoon, or you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think addiction's the wrong word to use there. But technically, yeah, I think it's a true statement. And can I start my day without a cup of coffee? Yeah, and I do. There are days when I forget, like especially if I'm not doing my usual work routine. If I'm doing other things, especially if I'm going outside of the house, I may not have coffee. So, and yeah, the Linus thing, I don't know. I I had read the other day that he was just taking time off, and I think the presumption was that he was going to go see a therapist. I don't know. That whole thing, well, like on any topic, right? I have many dimensions of feeling related to that. Man, I don't even know how to. So, where to start? Rosie asks where I'm from. I am originally from Chicagoland. I was born and grew up in a town called Elmhurst, which is 20 miles-ish due west of Chicago. So yeah, I'm a Midwestern boy. So yeah, okay. So Magnum Baguette actually drives towards an interesting point. So, okay, here's how I'm gonna approach this topic, okay? So, first off, I'll use Jordan Peterson, and this is not an endorsement or, condemnation of him at all. I'm gonna use him as a reference because he speaks of this topic frequently. He will mention one of the big five personality traits, which is conscientiousness. And he'll also mention agreeableness. And if you listen to him discuss these topics, you will note that he frequently says that agreeable people do not get ahead in the world. And this is true. And what does that mean? Well, agreeableness is going along to get along, right? Fitting in, saying, well, my opinion differs from what the group says it ought to be, but I'm just going to bite my tongue and I'm not going to push it because, and there could be a variety of reasons. I don't want to deal with conflict. Maybe I don't myself truly believe that my alternate position is defensible. And so therefore I feel like it would be a risk to push that. But there is a very, very large negative downside to being highly agreeable. You are a doormat, and the world will wipe its feet and ass on you. Now, like anything in human endeavors, it is not a binary thing. It is not 1 and 0. It is not you are all agreeable and you are all not agreeable. You are on a spectrum somewhere, and that spectrum fluctuates. But your particular spectrum of agreeableness is, there's a lower and upper bound for you, which is your standard range. Now, that's not to say that occasionally you go way outside of that, because again, we're not binary machines. We have issues at times. Things happen, right? And so, again, this is not all or nothing type thing, but if we take Linus as an example, Linus is a highly non-agreeable person. He exhibits low levels of agreeableness, but it has been very successful for him. However, and in general, if you look at CEOs, vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president, basically anybody that's, at the sociopathic level of management or higher, they are typically not agreeable people. Now, again, there's exceptions. But my experience has shown me that entrepreneurs, CXX level folks, and maybe their lieutenants just below them who are essentially fighting each other and, sniping at each other to get to that C-suite, they are, generally speaking, highly non-agreeable people. But here's the issue. The issue, and I have run into this myself, and Magnum Baguette asks kind of a follow-on question that I think ties into this very serendipitously. He says, do you feel that after this, if Linus stopped caring about the quality of code and started prioritizing feels over reals, will it affect the state of Linux? So here is an observation that I will make, which is related to this topic, I believe. In my experience being in large companies, both as an employee and as a third party, consultant, contractor, whatever you want to call it, if you care about the thing that you are working on, you are in trouble. Now, this is conscientiousness, okay? This is going to sound extremely counterintuitive. But it's just a sad fact of large human group dynamics that if you carve a niche and you care deeply about that niche, others will attack that as a fortress and attempt to burn it down. And there is nothing you can do to prevent that from happening. Then you have two choices. You can either be more or highly agreeable and allow eventually the swarm to overtake your niche, to overtake your castle and burn it to the ground. Or you can be highly non-agreeable and protect your castle at the expense of your relationship with others in the group and outside of the group. I will tell a story related to this, and it's about me. And so for 2 decades, essentially, I was an independent. I was a consultant, and I would go from company to company, and I would just see these disasters over and over again. And that was the reason they were bringing me in, right? Something bad happened, and I was the fixer guy that would come in and make everything better. But one of the traits that I've always had is that when I come up with ideas, when I come up with solutions for things, I become invested in them. And I care deeply about, or I should say, I cared deeply, past tense, about my vision, my solution. And going back to my example about carving out a niche and it becomes a castle and then others want to attack it, I had this happen to me over and over and over again. And I'm an idiot and it takes me a long time to learn, but I finally did start to put the pieces together. Kept asking myself, why is it I, as an outsider, care more about solving this problem in the right way than the people inside the organization? And it took me a very long time to realize it's not a rational set of behaviors. This is human tribal lizard brain bullshit that we have yet to divest ourselves from. And it just goes back to that whole other people see you doing something and it looks positive and they feel like they're getting fucked over, and so then they have to fuck you over. Because ultimately the selfish gene, right? We don't think about this stuff consciously, but there's programming in here, right? That is basically saying that guy's going to get the better chick. That guy's going to get, he's going to get better kids. Take him out, right? Take him out. Take him out of the equation, right? You want to be the top monkey. And it's very depressing, right? But before I had fully, synthesized this in my mind, I was in between the process of realizing all of this. I thought, okay, I've been an independent for, nearly 20 years. I'm going to go get a job again. And it just turned out that, we had young kids, and my wife was very encouraging of me not traveling anymore, or a lot less. And so I took a job. And I thought to myself, okay, now I'm an employee, right? And the fact that I'll get vested will be seen as a positive, because before, and again, like I say, I'm an idiot. It takes me a long time to piece things together. But in my mind at that time, I thought, okay, because I'm on the team now, I'm not this outsider, I'm not going to have VPs and CIOs and CEOs saying to me, Panichi, why do you give a fuck about this shit? Why do you care so much? I'm thinking to myself, okay, now I'm aligned, right? I'm on the team. No. Same shit, different place. Doesn't matter, right? And so it was after a very long time that I started digging more and more. And there's some science that's out there for this stuff. And I wouldn't say it's, there isn't a definitive answer, but I think there are bits and pieces that do start to give you a foundation or framework where you can understand how this stuff happens. And okay, so that story, where I ultimately came to was, you must not be invested. You must not care. And if you do, you will be attacked until you are dead. And your dead is figurative. They're not literally trying to kill you, but in a, metaphorical sense, they are trying to kill you. And if you show that, if you put that out there, then yeah, it's a fight to the death, There is no other option there. So wrapping this back to Linus and what I realized, because it could be said that I can vary my level of agreeableness, and there were periods when I was entrenched working on projects, trying to solve big problems, trying to save companies millions and millions of dollars, that I was less agreeable, right? So what I would say is that I think, I'm gonna guess here, I don't know this for a fact, okay? I don't know Linus, but I'm going to make a guess that the same thing that happened to the Python guy, what's his name? Guido. The same thing that happened to Guido recently just happened to Linus. And Linus and Guido, maybe like me, it took them decades of banging their head against the wall before they realized, fuck, there's no way out of this. There's no right way to do this. The only right way to do this is to walk away, is to not care. And the irony is, it's not that you don't care, it's that you cannot show it. You cannot draw lines in the sand. You cannot have principled positions. And what I would argue is that Linus is a good example of someone who uses non-agreeableness to help bolster his principled positions. And yeah, at some point a switch flips and you realize, what the fuck? Like, I'm the only one that seems to care. And it's killing me. It's right there. They're coming at me constantly. And yeah. So how do you not care? You distance yourself, right? First, I always go back, Gerald Weinberg, who passed away recently, which is a shame, but he had a long life. He's written many books, quite a few of them about software consulting, programming consulting. And, one of the things that, and again, this is during this process of me learning why I was always under attack, right? I was always on the defensive. I started reading a lot of Gerald's stuff, and Gerald, he highlights it real clearly, right? Like, if you're a consultant, unless the customer specifically asks you to do something, you don't do it. Your job is to show up. If they never ask you to do anything, then you don't do anything. Even if you see problems, even if you walk around their entire organization and you see where they could save $1 billion, if they don't ask you to tell them about it, you don't say anything. You don't mention it. You don't offer it. It's just not your place. You haven't been asked. And if you're asked, you confine your activity to the exact thing you've been asked to do and nothing more. Even if you can see beyond that, even if you can see a better solution, even if you can see, if we did this, this, and this, which would even cost the same as that, it would get you something better, you don't do that, because that's where you start to get into trouble. So you must narrow your scope, and I disagree. It's tiring to defend yourself constantly. It's very tiring. And I'm postulating here. I'm extrapolating. I have no idea if Linus is just caving because of SJWs, or if he's truly caving because he's tired of the fight. But I'm going to make a guess that it's the latter. He's tired of the fight. He woke up one day and he realized, you know what, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so he's started the process of not caring. And yeah, it's depressing as fuck, but it's just the way things are. And you can be a perfectly principled, non-agreeable person for your entire life. I mean, look at Steve Jobs. But what does it get you? In some cases, it gets you a lot of money. Some, I would not say it's a guarantee. So, that's my really long-winded commentary on the Linus thing. I think Linus is in the process of not caring. And who knows? We'll see, right? But I don't see him, and that's the other thing too, right, is you can stand up for your principles, but that doesn't mean that you interact, right? That doesn't, walking away or disengaging is you standing up for your principles, right? If you know that the wolves are going to devour something and it's going to turn into a bloody shit show, you know, you have a choice. You can either join the fray, fight, but you're fighting constantly, and that takes time, that takes energy, or you can say, no, I don't agree with that. I am going to distance myself from it, and therefore, you know, what they do, that's on them, right? If they turn it into a shit show, then they turned it into a shit show. So yeah. So someone, I think Rosie, asked, you know, advice on how not to care. What I would definitely say, again, if you're an outsider, right? So if you're a consultant, if you're an independent, whatever, you need to just kind of slightly rejigger the way you think about your engagements, right? It's what the client wants. And if they don't specifically ask for it, then you don't offer it. And that's, in that particular kind of an engagement, right? That can be a little easier because you're probably dealing with that group of people for a relatively short period of time, and there are perhaps more defined boundaries, some legal, depending on the nature of the engagement, around what the terms of the engagement are. As an employee, I hate to say this because it really does burn me up inside, but shut your mouth. You know, don't talk. Again, if someone specifically, and when I say specifically, I mean with specificity, not vagueness, right? If someone says, hey, in this exact function at this exact time, what would you do here? Or, hey, I can't quite debug this. What steps would you take? Sure, answer, help. But don't go beyond that. Don't go beyond the scope of whatever you were just asked to do. Now, I want you to think about this for a second, okay? Everything I'm saying here, does this sound like a methodology? Does this sound like something that companies are using and applying to their software development teams? Does it sound like Agile? The very first time I did an Agile project, an XP project, I felt weird doing it. And you could say, oh, well, okay, it takes you a certain amount of time to become accustomed to working within a methodology. And that's true, but this was well past the period of knowing what the cycle was, knowing what the cadence was. It still felt weird. And it took me a while to realize what it was. I felt like a factory worker. Because I've worked in factories, I've worked in warehouses. And stand-ups and story planning and pair programming and all that shit, it made me think immediately of being in a factory again. But in a very bizarre, twisted way, what most Agile methodologies do is they strip you of autonomy. They strip you of the need to care. This is it. This is your time box. This is your story card. This is all you know. Don't go outside the edges of the card. Don't go outside the edges of the iteration. Don't go outside the edges. You just don't do that. And all of a sudden, you don't have to care, really, anymore. And again, care here is obviously when you're writing code, you're going to do the job properly, right? Care here goes beyond, this is like ownership caring, right? This is, I care about the outcome of what's happening. But if you think about, again, Agile methodologies, they're specifically designed such that the outcome ends in a week or 2 weeks or 1 month, and that's it. That's the duration of your outcome. That's the duration of your caring. And it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter what happens next, right? Because as far as you're concerned, if you're a software developer, what comes next is either another time box in which your level of caring will be heavily constrained and your autonomy limited, or there will be no next time box. And either you will do something else or you will go somewhere else. So in a very perverse, twisted way, Agile methodologies actually accomplish what I'm describing here. If you just go along with them, right? If you just play the game and, again, Yagni, right? You aren't going to need it. That's been debated a lot, since Kent Beck coined it. But the real question is, what is he referring to, right? Well, it's my opinion he's basically telling developers, just don't give a shit, right? Don't worry about what comes next or what would come next, or because that's the problem, right? When you become, if all you do is you work on task cards and that's it, well, what's the horizon on that, right? It's a very narrow horizon. It's very difficult to step back and think of the big picture. And there's lots of things in, especially things like XP, but even Kanban, Scrum, there's lots of social and methodological things that are keeping you from doing that are forcing you back down to the card. And if that's how you operate, then yeah, it really, who gives a shit? If you design it wrong today, which you probably will, in fact, I would say very high priority or very high probability that you will, it's a known fact that you will be reworking that over and over and over again because it's wrong. But that's okay, because your scope of concern is intentionally limited. You're not allowed to think beyond the bounds of that. So, it's very depressing, and I think ultimately for companies, okay, if you do your own thing, you can do whatever you want. So let's take a guy like John Blow. I would say John Blow, again, I don't know him. I'm just basing this on videos I see of him. But I would say he's kind of high on the non-agreeable scale. He's got some jerk qualities to him. But here's the question. And John himself has even answered this question in interviews. He was never a good employee. He could never motivate himself. He would do these contract projects. He would work for other companies. He really didn't care because he didn't fit in very well. And I would argue that's because, like Linus, he's got some very principled positions. Whether you agree with those or not, it's not really relevant. So in his case, how did he fix that problem for himself? He went out on his own. So assuming you can do that, if you go out on your own, you're the boss, you can do whatever the F you want, right? So if you're building your own SaaS business, if you're whatever, if you're out on your own and you are not interacting with people in the process of building things, or if you are interacting with people, you're the guy on top or gal, and you're the one that's defining the nature of how everything happens. So if you can do that, that is a way to escape the dark reality of what I've just been talking about, because then you're free to do whatever you want. But, and I would say this is where Linus and maybe Guido are examples of things getting too big. Because one of the stories you will often hear about founders is that founders and companies is that it's great when it's small. We had 5 guys, we had a team of 10. It was wonderful. We all knew each other. We could just say shorthand and everything would just happen. And then, we got bought out or we IPO'd, and it was like overnight there were 200 more people, and then there were managers, and then there were performance reviews, and then it went to shit, right? So you have to make a choice, right? You either have to control the size of your organization intentionally, right? For this very reason. Now, and it all depends on what you want, right? I would say if you look at a guy like John Blow, he has said over and over again, he just wants to be successful enough so he can make more games. So I would say you're never going to see like Thekla have 500 employees. I mean, I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it, right? He's going to keep that company very small because he knows intuitively that if it gets too big, if there are too many people, then you get into that same situation. Even as a founder, you get into that same situation. You care, the others don't, war, right? And again, care here is kind of a catch-all for having extremely deeply felt beliefs and principled positions upon which you are willing to draw a line in the sand and fight for, and that's care. Or you can recognize ahead of time, maybe before you even start, okay, I know exactly how this is going to go. I'm going to build this, I'm going to get it to this point where other people who don't give a shit, right, they only care about the fact that you have X money, and then if you multiply it by this other thing, they get more of that. That's all they care about. Those are investors, those are VC. What the thing is, what the widget is, they don't care, right? It could be a pooper scooper as far as they're concerned. As long as it makes them more money, that's all that matters. See, but so as a founder, as long as you can get your head straight and say, okay, I'm going to build this thing. I know at some point I'm going to have to let it go, right? I know at some point I'm going to have to cut the cord and let them do their thing with it. And I'm going to take what I get and I'm going to be happy with that and go do something else. So that's what I would say. You have a couple choices there. But I will say this, if you go a VC route, if you try to raise funds, if you get angel investors involved, this is why I've never been a big fan of that space. Because whether you realize it or not, those actions force you down the ladder road. They force you down the road of you, as soon as you take that VC money, you just signed your exit, right? It's not like to the day, it's you are going to exit. And when I say exit, meaning you aren't at that company anymore. And a lot of first time, startup founders, that surprises them sometimes. They aren't prepared for it. So that's why people ask me, oh, hey, should I go do VC? Should I do this? It always comes down to what do you want? Do you want a place that you can go work for the rest of your career that's yours, that you own, that you created? Or do you just want money in a bank account at some point? And then you can maybe go do something else. You have to pick. And again, there are always exceptions, but this seems to be the pattern I've seen play out over and over again. So Lumi says, if what you want is security, then your advice might make sense. But considering how much time of your life you spend on work, I think it's not worth the sacrifice. All right, so here's the problem. And I would say this is, this goes way beyond just work, right? This is why our culture is fucked up. This is why our governments are fucked up. This is why we don't do the things as a human race that we ought to do, seeing them with the knowledge that we have now, right? But there are two paths. You can be a highly non-agreeable, conscientious, but highly non-agreeable, principally positioned person, and you will be alone. Right? You will be on a hill, defending that hill by yourself. Because, right or wrong, the systems within which we exist right now are designed to force you down the other path. They are designed to, and it's getting worse. It's only becoming worse. With things like SJWs, let's look at what happened to Salvatore with Redis, okay? People attacked him. The lynch mob came after him because he had source code, that had the words master and slave in it. And if you think that that's as bad as it's going to get? No. It's going to be much, much worse, because there's no end to people who can be offended by everything or anything. People who cannot apply context, who see everything as universally global, are dangerous. And we're moving closer and closer to a day when that applies to everything. And so you can say that people ought to stand their ground, fight, be principled, but that only works, that only succeeds under certain environments. In other environments, that leads to a memorial where you were standing on the hill. And maybe that's, if that's what you want, then again, do what you want to do. But a lot of people don't want to do that. A lot of people have responsibilities. People have families. They have children. They want to, whether this is the right thing or not is another discussion, but they want to appear as though they did not sacrifice, the things that society will look down on them for. It's like, okay, you have a kid, and let's say his mom and his dad are like these super principled, highly conscientious, non-agreeable people that fight everything because everything is in, conflict with their positions. And let's say their positions are valid, but it's just, society and everything else is the opposite. And that kid spends an entire life living on the street, not having anything because they're blacklisted, because people hate them. Did that kid have a good upbringing? This is what people think about, right? Whether they do it like overtly consciously, like I'm narrating right now, or whether they think about it in a sort of oblique background sort of way, this is the decision making that every single person is making, right? They're saying, okay, I don't agree with what's happening in this situation, but man, if I say something, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not going to get a paycheck. I can't pay for my kids this or that. That's where the decision tree ends. And I don't blame people for it, right? I really don't. I mean, you cannot hold people oh, gray listed. Okay. Sorry. See, there you go. I already am using the wrong language. So, yeah. I mean, again, for years, I fought the fight. But eventually, I don't know, age seems to do this to people. You eventually wake up and you're like, you know what the hell am I fighting for? Nobody gives a shit. It's depressing, but it is what it is. So Rosie asked, which choice makes you the most happy? Here's what I can tell you. That job that I took, because after 20 years of being independent, I thought this was going to be a better situation for me. It was not. I was very happy with what I built and the problems I solved, but I paid an enormous psychological cost for it. And when I use metaphors like battle and standing on a hill and fighting and bloody mess, I use those intentionally because that's what it felt like. And if you look at it on paper, I mean, I can show how I saved tens of millions of dollars, made hundreds of millions of more for them with improved software and processes and tooling. It didn't matter, right? None of it mattered because they aren't going to let you have a spotlight, right? They are not going to let you shine. If you merge into the machine, if you merge into the collective, they'll let you be. But that's the best you can hope for, right? Unless you want to deal with the fire. So after that, when I left that company, I went back into consulting and freelancing. It was the first time in my career I ever suffered from burnout. And it was real. And it was very painful. And it took 5 years, really, to bounce back from that. And it was at that point that I just decided, you know what, I can't go through burnout like that again. I can't go through that process again. So if that makes me weak or stupid or not effective, then I guess those are the labels I will have to live with. But I just have finally come to the point where I realize I can't do that anymore. No matter how much I can care about my stuff, right? I can care about the things that I'm building my way for me. And when I say I don't give a shit what anybody else thinks, I don't. Because these are mine, and this is where I can get my refuge, right? And so I chose, I suppose, to be as agreeable as I can be. Now, that doesn't mean that I'll accept unethical behavior. It doesn't mean that I'll do things that I, absolutely don't agree with. But I've trained myself over the past, 8 some years here to, oh, you want to write it in Java? Okay. Yeah, great. Let's put some entity beans in there and let's use J2E, fuck it. If you want to go down that road, yeah, awesome. Great. Can't wait. Give me tons of XML, it's just not worth it, right? It just is not worth it. And, but at the same time, I would say, I used to be very open in the sense of scope. I used to allow scope to just be this flexible thing because I didn't want to, limit my options. But now that I'm in the go along to get along category, I'm much more interested in taking that agile mentality and really slicing scope down to, okay, this is exactly what you need. Okay, great. And because again, it makes it easier to keep that distance between those things. And we're not talking about engineering here. We're talking about social interactions. And that's my point. None of this has anything to do with technology. This has everything to do with people and dealing with people and working with people and being on a team of people, right? In an ideal white room lab, you know, we can talk about what engineering decisions are right or wrong, right? But that's not the world people live in. Well, yeah, exactly. Again, like if they don't ask you, "Hey, should we use Java for this?" Don't offer an opinion. There is no opinion to offer. That's what it is. That's what the environment is. If they're happy with that, that's fine, right? Um, no, I wouldn't even go to the extent of limiting it. You don't have to do that. It's not your job. Your job is to do what they ask you to do with the tools and the environment they give you. You know, and if that's going to result in a disaster, again, I go back to the reason companies love agile methodologies, especially Scrum, is they don't want you to tell them that. They don't want to hear it, right? They got sick and tired of programmers telling them, here's all this complexity 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road. They don't want to do it that way. What they want to do is they want to say, okay, put your blinders on. Here's what we want in the next 30 days. Okay, if that's what you want. And if that doesn't match what the next 30 days says it should be, oh well. I mean, oh well. Rosie says, do you get days when you can't do any programming work? I read code for 8 years now, and sometimes I get them. Perhaps I'm too distracted or tired. Yeah. I mean, I kind of have I have a rule, right, which I've mentioned many times before. I do write code every day, but I write code in a very specific time block, and I stick to that time block. Sometimes on the weekends, if I'm not feeling it, or on a particular day, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, you'll know if you really don't want to do it. So if you don't really want to do it, then don't, you know. But what I would say is, again, having gone through burnout and it being pretty bad, the one thing I always come back to is, even if I don't want to do it for a day here or there, I try to, reapply that loop again, right? But the other part of it too is you have to have something you care about that's yours. See, I'm not telling anybody not to care for yourself. I'm telling you that when you're engaged in what we call corporations today, that the rules are such that or not even corporations, large groups, when you are engaged in a creative, constructive, creative activity in a large group, there are just certain dynamics that arise. But if you keep it small, if you do things for yourself, things that you care about, then it's much easier to be motivated. It's much easier to get up every day and write code for that, because you care about that, and it's okay for you to care about it because no one else is paying attention. and that's the key, right? I've always, yeah. It's group dynamics, ultimately, that you have to be aware of. Oh yeah, I've done a fair amount of pair programming. I hate it. And let me tell you why. Because, it just doesn't just work to say, I hate it. But, okay, first, let's go back to the C3 project. So you had, Kent and Ward Cunningham on consulting. You had Ron Jeffries. You had Chet Hendrickson, and I'm sure there were some others. But if Ron and Kent pair, or if Ron and Ward pair, or Ward and Kent pair, that is a wholly different experience than if Kent and random programmer number 6 pair, where random programmer number 6 probably is like 24 years old, just graduated school, has absolutely no freaking clue what's going on, and that's not their fault, right? But the gradient there is so unbelievably steep between those two people that it becomes a training session. And you would say, okay, well, that's the whole point, right? Isn't pair programming supposed to be about learning? Well, yes and no, right? I mean, I would say mostly no, because the idea is you're supposed to be getting stuff done. And if I and someone, likely skilled or, equally skilled as me are working together, or the gradient of skill level is such that it's very small, yeah, maybe I'll pick something up from this guy, maybe he'll pick something up from me, but it's going to be small stuff. And we're going to be focused more on the problem. But in my experience, what happens is you either get two beginners that pair together, and that's a disaster. And I would argue a worse disaster than if they had both worked independently. Or you get someone who is extremely skilled and someone who is not extremely skilled, and it's a waste of time, because the more skilled developer ends up spending all their time training the unskilled developer. And here's the thing, I'm not against training. I'm not against teaching them. My position has always been that's a different activity. If I look at a job posting, or if a recruiter calls me or something, and they mention mentoring anywhere in the job description, I run away. And I'll often tell people, I see that you are looking for someone to mentor your team. Like, I'm okay taking this job, except I won't agree to do mentoring. Because it's a different, distinct activity. And it's a skill set that is not necessarily, it's not wholly defined by just being a software developer, okay? Some people can write code really well, but they can't articulate anything. You can't take them and give them junior programmers and expect those junior programmers to turn out, right? Whether people want to admit it or not, mentoring is just a synonym for training, and training requires a different set of skills. It also requires a different focus. I can't adequately train people if my job is to crunch out these other 20 things before Friday, right? What's going to win? What's going to win is the fact that I have to get these other things done, and the fact that I have to train these other people is going to fall by the wayside. So it's a distinctive skill set, and it takes its own time, right? Independent of whatever else you're trying to do, it takes its own time. And yes, role creep Very good label for it. And of course, because of course, companies want to get everything they can, they don't want to have to actually pay for somebody to come in and train people. They just want to lump it on their senior developers and say, oh, you're going to train them when they pair with you, or you're going to train them, I don't know, whenever, right? When Halley's Comet goes by. I have no idea. But the other thing with pair programming, so I talked a little bit about skill disparity, and I think that's a problem. I think the other issue is that regardless of what the rules of pair programming say, that one person is driving and the other person is or one person's typing and the other person is doing all the thinking, right? What ends up happening is, and I've seen this going both ways, one of the pair gets bored, right? The person doing the typing gets bored because they're just typing. The person doing the thinking gets bored because they can't type, and the way that they think is by typing. And so it's an uncomfortable situation, and yeah, you switch off and you're just equally as, not aware of what's going on. So yeah, my experience with pair programming is that it has lots of nice qualities in theory to it, but it's, as a daily repetitive practice, I just quite frankly don't. I just don't see the benefits. And realistically, a lot of companies don't do it, right? Because it's expensive. You really are, like, if you had a team of equally skilled seniors and you made them pair, you're wasting money, in my opinion. You're wasting money. The only reason that pair programming makes any sense at a dollar level is because they think that you're leveling up lesser skilled developers. So again, to reiterate, I am not against mentoring, as long as mentoring is an independent activity that is accounted for in schedules and budgets. Also acknowledging that mentoring/training is a unique skill set that even your best developers may not have, right? They may be great developers. They may be able to write perfect software and meet all the other requirements of your team, but they may not be trainers. And so that has to be acknowledged. Rosie says, do you feel that we as senior developers have way too many responsibilities? I definitely see the trend that companies are lumping more and more onto senior developers, yes. Again, there's this, we could probably go look for job postings now, right? And I guarantee, like, a bunch of them, if they're for seniors, they want mentoring, they want you to be a lead, they want you to do project management stuff, they want you to have Scrum Master certification. And again, all this is just companies being cheap. Companies being cheap, but also lazy, right? Not spending the time to really think about what it is they're doing in such a way that they can break these roles down in a more effective way. So yeah, I would generally say the trend right now is to lump more and more shit onto senior developers or more skilled developers' plates and get less for it, right? And my position in that stuff is always the same, right? If I'm in an engagement and I'm told you have to get these stories done by Friday. You have to mentor these two guys. You have to do code reviews for this. I always say, okay, tell me relative to each other what the priorities of those different things are, right? Of course, they're always going to say, oh, well, you need to get these stories done. Then everything else below it, I just ignore, right? And I tell them that. Okay, so everything else you just told me, that's going on the deferred pile. I won't be getting to that this week. Are we in agreement that these things are the highest priority and these other things don't matter, right? And if they won't agree to that, you don't push it, you just don't do it, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day, and that's the other thing, right? I used to work a lot, like as in, I used to put in insane hours to get stuff done. I don't do that anymore. Right? If you're a freelancer consultant, you're almost kind of required. I mean, if you're doing any kind of marketing or any other kind of business activities, you can't work 40 plus hours a week anyway, at least not for long. But I would say, insane hours are like 16-hour days, working, a full 24-hour day several times during the week. Yeah, like insane hours. I used to work a lot, and it didn't get me anything. I mean, it got me some money, but it didn't get me anything beyond that. Lord Warren says, do you have any advice on freelancing? I feel like that's an area worth looking into after a lot of experience programming. I'll be honest, man. I mean, like, to me, the freelancing contractor space is not super healthy right now. And the problem is we have, we have different terms for stuff, right? We have freelancer, we have contractor, we have consultant. So to kind of, I don't know. I guess the major difference there for things like freelancing, if you're a graphic artist, if you're a web designer or a web developer, the freelancing space maybe is okay, but it's been very slow for me, and I see there's just horrible downward pressure on rates in that space. Again, it kind of depends on what exactly we're talking about, what activities you're doing. But right. And see, that's the problem is, I think I said this last week or the week before, but like I've dropped my hourly rate to the bargain basement of 75 US dollars per hour, which I was billing in the early 1990s. So, accounting for inflation, I'm way underwater in terms of rate. 3 years ago, I was billing well over $250 an hour, and there was no market pressure on that, right? But overnight, I would say right after the US election, actually, 2016, end of 2016, that all changed. And again, just my personal experience, I see that all being on a very big downtrend. So it's tough. So RLA666 says, I'm currently in a big mess myself through role creep. I helped to run a very critical system, and through technical control over it, I inherited very high power to completely influence a large organization important stuff at the country scale. In the last weeks, I've been under constant watch by some people who assume that I've already used that power to influence things. Yeah, that's always the trick, right? Is more responsibility is not always good. It can be, but I would say you have to be extremely careful. Like, it's the structuring around that that's always the key, especially if you're an independent. Upwork, freelancer, all those sites are shit. I don't spend any time. It's not worth it. Those sites are horrible. And yeah, it's garbage. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me from Upwork that want me to write firmware for brand new hardware. There's nothing off the shelf, and their budget is $150. I'm like, yeah, goodbye. You're insane. So, yeah, with the way the market is right now, if you have a job and you're considering freelancing or contracting, I would definitely say do it as a part-time pursuit. Do not let go of your full-time job, even if you absolutely despise it. Like I say, the nature of the market has changed fairly significantly. That's hilarious. That is hilarious. So here's the thing, right? And I have never really done this, but it's been my observation. So people, for now, let's not talk about freelancing or contracting. Let's talk about consulting. So, but you have to kind of accept ahead of time that this is going to be maybe you're going to be doing things you maybe really don't like. So I'll give an example of what I'm driving toward here. If you are a generalist, right? Okay, so you're trying to get freelance work writing C++ or Python or PHP. Yeah, I mean, you probably can find some stuff out there. Like I say, though, the rates are very, very poor, in my opinion, compared to what they used to be. And I think a lot of, the directionality there is down. And in general, right, people are not looking for general skill sets, right? They're not, can you write code? Okay, so what? Typically, they're looking for help with very specific products. So, some CEO gets wined and dined by, Oracle salespeople. They go to the strip clubs, they buy the hiring manager or the purchasing manager, lap dances, and, they go to the Vegas Strip and they, blow a shit ton of money, and the guy signs on the dotted line, and now they have all this Oracle stuff, right, in-house. So, and I'm using this as an example. I'm not, there's tons of them. SAP, Red Prairie, Matrix. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there, right? Different industries, different environments. SaaS, things like Teradata. You get the idea, right? You're not selling coding. You're selling that you can set up Red Prairie. You can configure Red Prairie. You can set up whatever monstrosity Oracle is selling, right? Like, all these Oracle sweet garbage crap, and yeah, you know how to write Pro C, and you know how to integrate with all this, and if you need to write glue, you can do that. But that's nowhere. You don't even mention that stuff, right? That's not what's important. What's important is that you know these very specific tools. Actually, I had a conversation with a potential client not too long ago, and they used a workflow engineering tool from Siemens, right? It was very similar. And, they wanted to heavily customize this tool. And it would require some SQL querying, and it would require some Java code, but most of it was just twiddling with configuration. Okay, so that's where the big bucks are. The bigger bucks, let's put it that way. Because again, it kind of depends on which particular niche you pick, which particular products you pick. But like I say, that's a different job in the end than writing code, like what I'm doing on stream here, right? It's this thing plumps this pile of shit in that table, and then I'm going to write that script that's going to read that pile of shit and plunk it in this other pile of shit over here, and then that's going to go through some other pile of shit that works half the time and then talks with Concur, and Concur crashes, and then you have to have this other script that kicks this other thing off because Concur is a pile of shit, and if that doesn't finish, then the POs aren't in the right system, and then you can't, that's what you're looking at, right? And then what you're really selling is that all the ins and outs of all these different piles of shit. That this thing crashes every time you do this because of that other thing, and then that if you put this little thing in place, then you can work around that, and that's the thing that causes their employees to spend 2 months trying to figure it out. But you knew that because you'd already spent 20 hours one day trying to fix that, and they never fixed it, right? The vendor never fixed it because it's a pile of shit. The generalist freelance consultant doing mostly code is something that exists, so I wouldn't call it impossible or extremely hard to pull off either. Well, again, Lumi, you are the contrarian. You always seem to have the best market, so I congratulate you, man, but I'm not seeing it. So, and I've been doing this a really long time. So if you've got it, milk it. Fantastic. But for a lot of us, it ain't that great. Weeson 3000 says, I was actually thinking about asking you a freelancing question. Do you do hardware related freelancing, aka you get a board, need to write? If you do, how long does it? I used to do a lot of that stuff. I used to do a bunch of it. So Weeson 3000 is basically asking, have I done, driver firmware, custom software for custom hardware? The answer is yes. But as I've said before on the stream, that market has changed a lot in the last 15 years, really. And honestly, unless you have some very specific, it's horrible. The market's bad. That's where I'm getting to. It's not there are certain robotics, and when I'm talking robotics here, I'm talking like high end, okay, which you're going to have experience with that stuff, which can be difficult to come by. So, you know, what I see from most companies that are in this space, in fact, you know, I've had conversations with probably, I don't know, half a dozen in the past few months. They almost always end up going offshore with it. China, typically, because they can get it for, you know, very cheap. Now, the results are not always all that great, and I hear frequently that they have to do a lot of rework, but companies don't seem to care so much. If I tell them, hey, you got to pay me $75 an hour, you know, or if they, you know, if I, okay, hey, I can flat bid this, here's what it is, you know, it's usually, I mean, let's face it, it's usually 10, maybe 15, 20 times what somebody in China would charge them for it. So they go to China. It's a very difficult sale to make right now. I'm asking because we're looking pretty hard. We can outsource to shops that have the staff on call, but the results are good for some tasks and very hard when it goes into some crazy stuff. China's about $75 an hour these days, not that much cheaper anymore. Yeah, I mean, if you're getting quotes from them that are that rate, then maybe we finally hit parity. I'll tell you, I mean, I actually, so without giving away too much detail, I had a project 2 or 3 months ago. It was for a very, very well-known, if I said the name, you'd know who they are, medical equipment, you know, manufacturer. It was firmware and hardware design, and it was, yeah, I mean, they like just constantly kept trying to jack the rates down and get it cheaper, cheaper, cheaper. And at some point, it's like, okay, yeah, I can't make any money at this, so I don't know what you're comparing against, but yeah. So it's in my experience, it's tough. But let's see. Lordborn says, what do you personally see as a good, stable programming related job in the future? Like embedded, web dev, game dev. Game dev is again, game dev is like being an author. It's like being a fiction writer, in my opinion. If you hit a nerve, and it's timing, right? It's you hit all these points at the right time, then you could be a runaway success, right? But chances are you won't be. And if you look at a lot of the game devs, indie game devs, who were kind of what I would say like grinding, making money, a lot of them have fallen off and in the past several years, and it's a hard business. If I were able to self-fund a game, and I could do that game on my own schedule, in my own way, I would consider doing it. Just because A, I like games, and B, it would be, again, it's a gamble. You'd put that out there. If it does well, then great. If not, you're still doing other things. But I would not, unless you have lots of connections in the industry, unless you have lots of prior experience, I would not bet the farm on games. Web dev, man, I don't know. I mean, I have my own personal opinion, on web dev, and I think the trend is for that stuff. It's going to change. I don't know the exact details. I have my theories, but I don't know that I would right now. Web dev is probably okay, but be careful because that's probably not going to be true in 5 years. So embedded, like I said, it depends on embedded. I see a lot of competition there. I mean, now I'm not a big embedded shop. It's just me. So it all depends on what you're doing. Um, so, you know, I guess you'd have to compare yourself to different parts of the market in terms of size and who you're servicing. But my experience with embedded work is that the rates have been pushed down very low, and I see that trend continuing. If you're looking for embedded engineers, Weeson, shoot me an email or ping me on Discord. I'd love to write some assembly or C for you. Hell, I'll even write it in Rust. Whatever. RLA666 says, I have gotten some very good offers for repairing hardware like control boards, but the issue has been that there's almost no down. Yeah, well, yeah, that's always an issue, right? Is with some of this stuff, if only you had experience, so you had the experience, so it's like a chicken and an egg thing. We often get either very, very senior people who actually not that agile code that much anymore, or people who want to get into hardware. Yeah. I mean, $75 an hour is better than a poke in the eye. But as Weeson said, he used to charge $150 an hour for it. And see, that's where I'm coming from, right? I used to charge a lot more for this stuff, and rates have dropped a lot. Now, again, I mean, I'm not like boo hoo hoo. That's not my point. I'm just, from a business perspective, it does change things. Yeah, I think web development, like I just say, be careful. It's, I think it has some time left to run, but it's on a downtrend. So, and when I say downtrend, what I mean is I think there's just more competition. I think rates are just going to be pressured downward. Um, 450 pounds a day. I mean, that's not too bad. Yeah, I mean, that's in that range, right? See, this is what gets me, and this is the part that, like, companies just like dumbfound me. So I hear from people like, oh, we're trying to find embedded engineers, or we're trying to find this, we can't find these people. But then, you know, companies seem hell bent on going through middlemen for everything, and the middlemen don't know anything about anything, and they filter everybody out that could potentially be a good candidate. And so, to some extent, I think the market is in disarray because there's a discovery problem, right? But at the same time, like I see it as these companies doing it to themselves. So the question is, like, what's the dog and what's the tail and which is wagging what? I don't get it. It doesn't. Again, I go back like 10 years. I used to be able to call into companies or go meet with people like hiring managers, engineering managers, and they would maintain, contact, and we would have direct communication. And now it's so difficult to do that, at least in the US, at least with the companies I'm dealing with. And I just, the whole, it's hard to find people. Uh, Partly Atomic says, I was recently rejected by a company that was referred internally to by more than 2 people, including one PhD. I bet they're finding that it's hard to find people. Yeah. But see, here's the thing, like, again, okay, yes, I agree. I mean, building trust. Can they trust you? Okay, I'm here talking to you guys right now. Do I seem untrustworthy? When I talk to other people in person, I don't talk any differently. I mean, this is who I am. I'm not putting on an act. This is not like, I'm not changing my voice. This is who I am, okay? Um, and it's stuff like that where it's like, okay, you know, when I hear things like building trust or they want to trust you, what I hear is they look at your CV and they see that you've done a bunch of gigs. Oh, you're a job hopper. No, I'm a freelancer slash contractor slash consultant. Um, so I don't, these projects don't last that long, right? I'm not in control of that. The other thing that just blows so many companies' minds, right, which is why I don't do this anymore. Like my CV has no dates on it. It had because, Jesus Christ, I mean, I have overlapping engagements. Like people can't get their head around that shit, you know. When I used to have CVs that had dates on it, they, well, you're doing this and you're doing that, and I'm like, why are we even talking about this? Um, Rosie asks, is there enough talent in the U.S.? Because in London there's plenty of opportunities, but not that many. Yeah, the U.S., I don't know. I do think that there is an overhang of people who got into the field because big bucks, and unfortunately they were motivated by that only, and their skill sets probably aren't that great, and there probably is a lot of chaff in the system, and getting the wheat is, I will probably grant, somewhat complex. The problem is, I think, again, like I say, there seems to be a discovery problem, at least in the US, where too many people are getting pushed out that shouldn't be. Um, RLA 666, I interviewed one company for a job, and the whole interview was built up around finding reasons not to hire you. Slayer Darth says he considers himself a good developer, but finds it difficult to find a good company fit. The problem is that people who sell books about management need to, so they invent new nonsense. Yeah, isn't that so true? So in my interviews, I usually end up asking people, how do you reverse a string in place in C? How many people answer that correctly? That filters out a lot of people. And maybe it's a trick question. It's not really a trick question. See, I'm okay with questions like that. But I switched to reverse words inside a string. Uh, Someone said that their string reversal exercise in Java for their interview process filtered out a lot of candidates. So I'm curious, Weeson, you went from just asking them to reverse a string in place to asking them to switch to reverse individual words in the string. Is that the second question in sequence? Like if they can reverse the string in place, then they go to the next one? Or did you just change the question? I'm just curious. Oh, okay, gotcha. Oh, where was I? Okay. Well, keep in mind that Weeson is he's interviewing for embedded guys, right? So he's asking He's checking to see if they have lower level knowledge. So it's, in his particular case, if you're looking for embedded or lower level engineers, asking somebody to do it in Python or Java, you're not getting to the same, I don't think you're getting to the same root discovery there. And I do think, I would agree, right? And there, we could argue about ways that you could approach the questioning, but like you do want to kind of understand, do these people understand pointers, right? And if not, all right. Speaking of my own low level stuff, okay, so to really get some more of this working, I need to finish a couple things. So, like I say, I think I've got the for loop and the with expression and defer. I've got those coded about as far as I can get them right now. Excuse me. So here's what I need to do next. What I need to do next is we need to get the type meta information emitted. So what does that mean? What that means is we need to, in program, we're going to have a helper function that will look up identifiers and look up type references, on those identifiers. This would be after we resolve unknown types and stuff. And then what we're going to do, what I need to do is I need to emit for every type, I need to emit a type info into memory, and we'll label them, and because then by doing that, I will be able to go back to the type of intrinsic and finish that. But more importantly, the any type, which needs a pointer to one of those type info structures, will then be able to get any working properly. And that's going to be, this is going to be kind of a tag team between these two here, the initializer, finalizer. And I have some of the plumbing in place for this. It's probably going to have to evolve to support this properly, but because then by fixing any, or getting any to work, I should say, then in the interpreter, the FFI instruction will be able to know the type of the any that is on the stack, so that I can then finish, essentially get the FFI stuff working correctly. Because right now it's kind of sort of janky, and I would like to get that working more correctly. So that's one part that needs to be finished, because then this leads me to, then we can get arrays working, because in order to finish for loops, I need arrays, and arrays are going to encompass literal syntax and access, subscripting, getting all that stuff working. But we need the type information so we can, because we need to know what the type is for the things inside of the array, especially if it's an array of any's. And so all these things kind of play together. I almost have, like, string is almost there, because if I create a string variable, it will do the initializer and finalizer for it. So if I do foo is equal to hello world, that should generate an initializer for foo. Whoa, that's not good. That's weird. Yeah, and then I've got some bug here, which I'm going to have to chase down. Why does that break that? I don't know. Well, that's just weird. I don't think this matters because interesting. I did change it. All right. Okay, so it did create the initializer. I'm not sure why that. There's a break right here. This loop is very weird. This is just me testing stuff. Okay, so I think I figured out part of my problem. I don't think I have my alignment right on my types, so I fixed that. Well, at least temporarily. So then I'm really curious if I comment out the string. No, that's still broken. Okay. Ooh. That's wrong. That was a bug. No wonder things were off. Oh. Wait, look at that. Okay, I think I figured out my stupidity. Oh, I told you guys you're stupid. Yep, that fixed that. Very good. uh, Okay. So I figured out why that no op was needed. Turned out in the assembler, the thing that was applying addresses was not sizing the reserved uninitialized data definitions properly. So I fixed that. So that bug's fixed. So yeah, the string type does generate an initializer, but I need to finish those for all the others. Yeah, and this was the fix for the data definition when we're computing addresses. If it's initialized, it's just the size in bytes times the number of values that we have. But if it's uninitialized, those values are actually the number of things to reserve. So I actually have to loop through those and add up the actual byte counts there. So yeah, that was bad. So that's cool. That's fixed. Okay, so later today, I'm going to start working on these, get these. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a function to program that goes through, finds all of the types that are used in what it's compiling. Again, this will be after all the unknown identifiers and unknown types are resolved. And then I'll just loop through those, and then I'm going to have to add something on type that will generate a type info, data dump essentially of the structure based on the type in question. And then I'll emit those at the very top, and they'll be labeled. Then I'm going to go back to the type of intrinsic, and I think the way I'll end up doing it is probably on assembler or somewhere in session. I'll have a structure that maps the type to the label of where that type info is in memory. And so then all type of has to do is return a pointer to that location. And we have code that does that already with address of, so it'll basically be a very similar setup. And then I'll start looking at any and more work on string and array to get those to where the initializers are working properly. Because what I want to do, I want to get all this final type stuff working, because the more I was thinking about it, where is it? So like the assert intrinsic and the, I don't have an issue in here yet for it, but the range intrinsic, I realized I can implement those in Basecode if I get this other stuff done. And so that'll actually be like our first real meta programming test. So let me see if I can explain what I'm thinking here. So what I'm going to end up with, I'm going to start restructuring these test files because we're starting to get to the point where I can actually write real test code in Basecode where we can assert things. So I'm going to start creating like a core include or something. And the foreign declarations and other setup will move there. But what I'm going to do is, if I can get any to work, right, then assert is easy. Right. Because we've got if statements. So we can implement that directly in Basecode. But like range, so we start and step, and this would return an array of integers. So So range is going to look something like that. But here's the key, right? So then, okay, why would I do this? So then we'd be able to write code. I'd be able to finish for. So then I could say for x in range 0 to 100, right? But here's the cool part. This runs at compile time. So this is going to generate an array. This becomes, a compile time generated array here. Because I could put this in the compiler, but I want to start moving away from that and have this stuff actually be written in Basecode. So this is what I'm trying to push toward. Something like that. So that's the plan. Okay, unfortunately, I am out of time this morning. Thanks, Magnum Baguette. Oh, let's rate this guy. All right, everybody. We had a pretty lively conversation today. It was good. Hopefully I wasn't too boring. I will try to get stuff done this afternoon. Pretty excited. I can see the point. We're getting to the point where I can actually start writing some real code. And yeah, getting there. So say hi to Ed Farage. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. See ya.